Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. We're going to be taking a look at Living on the Razor's Edge, the Scott Hall story. This is a WWE DVD, Blu-ray DVD release that was added to the collection a few years ago. I made a video looking at the DVD when it was like a while after it came out. I picked it up on a $5 Friday sale with WWE Shop, and then it sort of sat on the shelf for a while. I got a little bored one day, and I think I watched the Scott Hall, the Dudleys, and I think I watched another one, but I made reviews on the other DVDs, but never was able to hit up making a DVD review on the Scott Hall documentary story. So here we are, years later. I watched this on the WWE Network. I thought this was a really good story on Scott Hall. Not a really good story on Razor Ramon. If you want to follow the life of Razor Ramon and get the normal wrestling documentary where you follow Scott Hall getting into the wrestling business, Scott Hall getting the call to go work for Vince McMahon, if you want to learn about him, jumping ship and going to WCW and being a leader of the NWO, and basically his life, where he would go to ECW, and then he would come back to WWE, and then basically disappear off the face of the earth after 2002, only to reappear at WrestleMania 30 to go into the Hall of Fame. This probably isn't your documentary. We go over those things, but we just basically touch on Scott Hall's wrestling career. This DVD, this documentary, bases around Scott Hall's life moments and his decisions that he made basically for his life to fall apart, and then put it back together by going and seeing DDP and being a part of the whole DDP yoga revolution, where he would go on and fix the likes of Jake the Snake Roberts and Scott Hall. DDP was trying to help out Vader. Now he's trying to help out Mick Foley. Just trying to get their life better for the last part of their, I was going to say their career, but the last part of their lives. Just making it where they're not, living in pain or having to hide substance abuse problems and things like that. Just trying to build them up so you can fix what's going on the what's going on the outside. Scott Hall was a damn good wrestler. Scott Hall has a damn good wrestling mind. But throughout this, basically we learn that Vince McMahon, Scott Hall, DDP, and a few others sort of point at a time where Scott was wrestling in WCW, and maybe he got a little, he got his britches a little too tight, I guess you can say. Coming in and starting up the NWO, becoming one of the hottest acts in the company, being friends with the boss, Eric Bischoff, and because of the fact that he was one of the biggest stars in the business at that time, really thinking that there were no rules around, what they could and couldn't do. It wasn't like Eric Bischoff could really fire, a member of the NWO, and just have him disappear, especially at that time period during the Monday Night Wars, because no matter how bad, Scott Hall was doing, Vince McMahon would have scooped him up and put him on television the next week just to do it, just to say that he got one of the guys from the other organization to jump ship during the war, thinking that it was going to make just fans one night change the station back from Nitro to Monday Night Raw, and keep it pumping from there. Very early in the documentary, we are taken to a strip club parking lot, where basically Scott Hall tells the story of just making some easy bucks, living in Florida, being a bouncer at a strip club where he actually was dating one of the girls there, and somebody got a little handsy with the girl, and he had to take them out in the parking lot, which sort of escalated into a fight. And there came a moment when the guy pulled the gun on Scott Hall, but Hall was able to get the gun and shoot the guy. The guy died. And that's a moment that Scott Hall sort of points to, saying that this is a moment that he hides pain in his life, his personal life, and that's one of the reasons that he drinks and does drugs, and he's trying to get to a point where he can get that out of his mind and continue on living his life. And one of the things that his counselor tells him is that basically that other guy was going to kill him if he didn't kill him. So that is one thing that he has to get over, and basically get to the point of, just getting better and getting right. But, we do talk about his wrestling career. Scott was one hell of a wrestler in his day. He was Vinny Vegas in WCW. That's one of the first places that I saw him, where he was being managed by DDP. Shortly after getting exposure in WCW, he was called by people at WWE, Pat Patterson, and basically said, did you sign a contract? And Scott Hall basically tells the story that he tried to call Pat Patterson for a year, almost every day, and just trying to get him to return a call, but they would never return the call. And all of a sudden that they're interested, it just happens to be the same day that Scott Hall signed a contract. And Pat Patterson tells him, well, at least in a year, you can tell him you're walking, and WWF is interested. And that's basically where he jumps ship. Vince McMahon grabs a hold of the Razor Ramon character, even though he doesn't know that it's a ripoff of Scarface. And he's very hands-on with making the videos that would launch the career of Razor Ramon. Even to me, they didn't really make sense as a kid. Now that I watch him when I'm older, I guess he's trying to be Scarface, but I'm not the biggest fan of the Scarface movies. There's only one. But, maybe that's just exactly what it's supposed to be. Hall came in immediately as one of the biggest heels in the WWF, challenging Bret Hart for the WWF Championship at the Royal Rumble. Would then start tagging with Ric Flair, where they were supposed to team up against the Ultimate Maniacs, but Ultimate Warrior jumped ship, and then it was replaced by Mr. Perfect, which did sort of make sense because Mr. Perfect at that time was managing Ric Flair, and for that turn to happen, it was pretty cool, which would then set up the loser leaves town on Monday Night Raw, where Flair would jump ship and go back to WCW. They don't really touch on, the matches that you would think of, the ladder matches against Shawn Michaels. They sort of go right into, Scott Hall trying to renegotiate to make some more money. He didn't want to leave, but WCW had an offer on the table that was so much money he couldn't turn it down. And plus, on top of that, it was less dates because his life at home with his wife was falling apart, and he didn't want to lose that. So he took the money. He took less dates. He went to WCW. His buddy Kevin Nash ended up coming with him, and it was lightning in a bottle. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash start the NWO. They bring in Hollywood Hulk Hogan to be the third man, and it just takes off. And they don't spend a lot of time on the NWO, because if you wanted to watch a documentary on the NWO, there's enough of them out there. I mean, WWE's made 2 of them on their own alone. You can go in and watch the Monday Night War. You can watch the episode of Monday Night Wars. There's a lot of stuff up there. I'm pretty sure the death of WCW or rise and fall of WCW touches on it. So there's a lot of that stuff out there. They don't talk about Scott Hall getting a release from WCW, from his contract. They don't talk about Scott Hall showing up in ECW. They basically just make it look like Vince buys WCW and brings in the NWO. There's no talk of the contract buyout. There's no talk of the guys not wanting to come in because of their deals with Time Warner being guaranteed, and them not being a part of the Survivor Series or the Invasion or any of those things. It's just the NWO shows up, and they basically say that it was a good idea, but Scott wasn't in the right place. He wasn't in the right state of mind, and his stay in WWE really didn't last. From there, they start talking about the independent dates that we've all seen the videos of on YouTube, where he's showing up and he's not in the right state of mind, and he's just embarrassing himself. And Kevin Nash reaches out, gets him some help. He goes to rehab, and they basically make it seem like this one trip to rehab just snaps him back into place, and there he is at the Hall of Fame, saying, good guys don't live forever, but bad guys do. It's a really good documentary. It touches on the whole DDP yoga deal, which if you haven't seen the redemption of Jake the Snake Roberts, which is a DDP documentary release, or you haven't seen the DDP Positively Living, this is something you really need to check out, because it puts you in the right state of mind to start living your life right. You don't have to do DDP yoga, but I think listening to the words that Diamond Dallas Page talks and just getting that into the state of mind and using it daily, you're going to start pushing yourself positively. And I think that's the one thing that matters most in this world if you want to get to where you want to get to. A lot of people just sit back in the corner and just sort of complain about the things not going right in their life, and there's some people that go out there and see that things aren't going 100% right, and they go out and do the things that they need to do to change those things, and that's when you start getting things coming back to you, and you realize your life's greater than where you started at, because you worked hard to get it. And I guess now we're talking about DDP more than anything, but it's a good release. It doesn't touch on his wrestling. This is sort of like the first release we've got that talks more about other issues from WWE other than just the wrestling issues. The Jake the Snake Roberts documentary that they came out with like in 2005, 2006 did deep down into sort of Jake the Snake's drug problems because of like things like Beyond the Mat that came out, and they wanted to touch on that and sort of just clear things up. Like Jake sort of saying that it's not his fault that he did those things, because they didn't really tell him what the documentary was really going to be about. They really said that this is we want to show your drug problems to show it doesn't happen to other people, not sort of just kick you while you're down. And that's what Jake said that they basically did. But this is a good one. It's not on the top 10. We talk about that a lot, but I think definitely you check this out. If you don't have it, you're going to love it.